Kalorama, a Recorded Books Highbridge imprint, presents The Greek Connection, The Life of Elias Demetracopoulos and the Untold Story of Watergate, by James H. Barron. Read by Robert Fass. Publisher's note: this audiobook has bonus material. Please contact whomever you purchased this audiobook from to request the material. All photos and images referenced in this audiobook can be found in the bonus material. History is malleable. Memory is imperfect, but its inherent instability allows our past, which we usually see as fixed, to remain as it actually is, malleable, changing not just as new information emerges, but as our interests, emotions, and inclinations change. Ken Burns. Introduction. Foreign meddling in American elections didn't start in 2016. In 1968, the Greek military junta, which had overthrown its country's democratic government the year before, tried to buy influence by secretly funneling $549,000, almost $4 million in today's dollars, to the Nixon campaign, money that likely began as black budget U.S. aid to the Greek equivalent of the CIA. The winning margin in that election, the second closest presidential contest in the 20th century, was less than 1%. The bagman for the illegal funds was tycoon and Republican Party fundraiser Tom Pappas, who later became known on the Watergate tapes as the Greek bearing gifts. Timely disclosure of this transfer could have meant a Hubert Humphrey victory, no President Nixon, no Watergate, and a different course of history. At a 2009 fundraiser for the New England Center for Investigative Reporting, of which I am a founding board member, I told our guest speaker, Cy Hirsch, I was considering writing something on this unexplored transaction, a stillborn October surprise. He recommended I contact Greek journalist Elias Demetracopoulos in Washington, the person who tried unsuccessfully to expose the money laundering plot. When I did, I quickly realized that this episode was but part of Elias's much larger and even more compelling life story. As a boy, he was brutalized for fighting his homeland's Nazi occupiers and imprisoned. He survived being shot in the Greek Civil War and nearly died of tuberculosis incubated during his incarceration. Inspired to become an investigative journalist by the 1948 assassination in Greece of CBS correspondent George Polk, Elias became a fiercely independent and scoop-hungry reporter, exposing truths others wanted hidden. In 1967, he escaped the Greece's military dictatorship and fled to Washington, where for 7 years he led the fight to restore democracy in his homeland. He became a target of Greek plots to kidnap and execute him, as well as of CIA, FBI, and State Department attacks on his reputation and effectiveness. Unbroken, he resolutely stood up for himself, his country, and his sense of honor. Elias Demetracopoulos was a difficult subject. He gave me full power under the Freedom of Information and Privacy Acts to access all his government files, and he provided reams of articles and documents concerning better-known aspects of his career, but opened up only slowly about his multifaceted personal life. He steadfastly resisted divulging the names of sources to whom he had pledged confidentiality, even long after the sources had died. Nevertheless, for more than 5 years I visited him frequently and talked with him by phone, often daily, as I tried to peel back the layers of his story, getting him to confirm or disconfirm information I'd discovered elsewhere and reveal more of himself. Eventually, he gave me access to his personal files, shared once hidden stories, and permitted friends who held his confidences to speak openly with me. Journalist, information broker, lobbyist, Wall Street financial consultant, trusted advisor, tipster, troublemaker, dangerous gadfly, suspected foreign agent, desired extra man for Georgetown dinner parties, impassioned democracy fighter and free press advocate, a man with friends and sources spanning the political spectrum, Elias always cultivated an air of mystery and carefully compartmentalized the different parts of his life. When he died in 2016, obituaries in both the New York Times and the Washington Post described him as enigmatic. He was said to have negotiated a unique and controversial swath through Washington's political and social thickets. Elias P. Demetracopoulos was never as famous as celebrity mononyms like Bono, Oprah, Liberace, and Madonna, but for decades he was known around the nation's capital and in major European cities as simply Elias. And being famous in Washington is different from being famous in music or Hollywood. When Susan Margolis sought to explain fame in her 1977 book of that name, she chose Elias as her exemplar of fame in Washington. Fame, for Margolis, involved having power, having access to power, or appearing to have such access. Elias had it all. The essence of his success, she wrote, was his ability to be both an outsider and an insider, projecting an attractively reassuring savoir-faire, to be a trusted keeper and sharer of secrets who had mastered the game of knowing what and how much to disclose, or tantalizingly hold back until the next time. We can see the impact of Demetracopoulos' reputation in the difference between two 1976 receptions held in honor of the publisher of Tovima, the then influential Greek newspaper following the restoration of Greek democracy. The Greek ambassador invited celebrity journalists and government officials to his embassy, but the gathering was small and unnoticed. The only A-list invitees who attended were Margaret Truman and her husband Clifton Daniels of the New York Times. The next evening, Elias borrowed the mansion of his friends Walter and Lydia Marlowe and threw a party for the same publisher that became the talk of the town. The guests included 42 senators with names like Fulbright, Kennedy, and Javits, 34 congressmen, cabinet officials, leading Washington socialites, financiers, reporters, columnists, editors, broadcast journalists, bureaucrats, and 22 ambassadors, including the Greek ambassador. It was a remarkable achievement for someone who for many years was deemed persona non grata by both Greek and American officials. There are lessons for us in Elias's unyielding battles against powerful and abusive governments and for human rights and democratic values, his dogged pursuit of news and would-be news leakers, his belief in the potential of congressional investigations and hearings to expose wrongdoing, and his effectiveness in working across partisan political aisles. There are eerie echoes today of Elias's world of the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, when foreign money tainted and undermined free and fair elections, when fragile democratic norms buckled under popular susceptibility to authoritarian impulses, when human rights were deemed expendable, when independent journalists and political critics were harassed, subjected to disinformation campaigns, and disparaged as purveyors of fake news. It's my hope that the saga that follows will illuminate the real story behind this extraordinary Greek patriot and relentless champion of democracy and a free press. 1. Growing up. He was a journalist before he was a journalist, a gatherer and disseminator of information. He never considered doing anything else. Elias Demetracopoulos grew up in a modest but comfortable four-room stone house at 51 Daphnomili Street, near the base of the north side of the greatest vantage point in Athens, Mount Lykabetos. From his yard he could look up at its coniferous slopes and looming limestone prominence. His close-knit neighborhood was less than a mile from downtown Athens. The central street was an uneven dirt road flanked by Mediterranean pines, its quiet interrupted only by sounds of roosters and of street vendors passing through with pushcarts and donkey wagons noisily hawking their wares and services. Little distinguished his stolidly middle-class home from the others in a neighborhood of shopkeepers and small merchants, except for the books. The house was filled with anthologies, mythologies, histories, and biographies in Greek, and, most unusually, in English. Elias's father, Panayotis, was born in tiny Leondarion, about 6 miles from Megalopoli, a mountainous village in the province of Arcadia, in the east-central Peloponnese. To poets, playwrights, and painters, Arcadia is a utopian idyll of unspoiled wilderness and natural beauty. At the end of the 19th century, Panayotis's hard-scrabble agrarian parents found it inhospitable land from which to eke out a living and an inauspicious place to raise a family. They moved to Athens in his early childhood. Elias Demetracopoulos shaped his own life. In his late teens, he sought his fortune in America. In Chicago, the destination of choice for Arcadian Peloponnesians, he worked at odd jobs, from construction to food carts, until the Great War came. Unlike fellow Greek emigrants, disparaged in ethnic lore as koulourakia, crumbly cookies, or kotes, hens, for remaining abroad in times of trouble, Panayotis returned home to fight. He volunteered to defend the fatherland, and he was almost killed in the process. Afterward, still seeking better economic prospects, he returned to Chicago, where he worked until the mid-1920s. He settled in the growing Greek town enclave along Halsted Street. It was a difficult time to be a Greek in America. Greek immigrants were discriminated against for being strange, undesirable, and dangerous. Panayotis started his own fruit stand and did modestly well at first. Instead of sending his meager earnings home, he invested in the rapidly rising stock market of the Roaring Twenties. But, like many of the unsuspecting public, he was unaware of then-legal stock price manipulation schemes, and his losses soon outpaced his gains. Growing nativism and exclusionary U.S. immigration quotas on those coming from Southern and Eastern Europe prompted Panayotis to consider naturalization. But the pull of home was strong, and he did not want to be one of the many single Greek males to start an American family with a picture bride. When Panayotis returned to Athens, his English was good enough to provide him steady work as an interpreter for businessmen and tourists. But he wanted something more. A lover of history, antiquity, and the Greek classics, he was proud of his heritage and taught himself the elements of archaeology. He enrolled in the necessary courses, then passed the qualifying examination to be a state-certified official guide to archaeological sites throughout Greece. Panayotis spent much of his life as a xenagos, a guide for foreigners at the Acropolis and Athens museums. For decades, Mr. Demetracopoulos was the big hotel concierge's guide of choice for visiting celebrities and other VIPs. Home for good, Panayotis met Panayotapoulos, who had grown up in a moderately wealthy family with extensive farming and business interests in the northern Peloponnese town of Aegion, not far from the bustling port of Patras. Panayotis' good-natured demeanor masked her fiercely protective and take-charge personality. After a brief courtship, they married in Athens on February 25, 1928. Panayotis was 40, a decade older than his bride. Less than 10 months later, on December 1st, they had their first and only child, Elias Panayotis Demetracopoulos. Elias was named for Elijah, the zealous prophet-saint who sternly reproves the lawlessness of Ahab and Jezebel, challenges the injustice of the king, slays false prophets and priests for leading the people astray, and ultimately rides to heaven in a flaming chariot. Given his father's Greek mythology predilections, Elias may also have been named for Helios, the all-seeing sun god who each day traversed the sky in his golden chariot. Either way, his name would prove prophetic. Modern Greek history is a tale of tangled and conflicting dualities, including Byzantine and Western, authoritarian dictatorships and fragile democracies, alternating monarchies and republics. Its roots intertwine Hellenistic paganism and Christian orthodoxy, and are expressed in both its liberal cosmopolitanism and provincial conservatism. From the fall of Constantinople in 1453 to its creation as a sovereign state in 1830, Greece was a peripheral province of the Ottoman Empire, a dusty backwater outside the pale of basic economic development. The educational and cultural benefits of the Renaissance and Enlightenment had largely passed it by. Even the glories of ancient Greece were alien to the impoverished inhabitants. It was foreigners educated in the classics who rekindled interest and helped the new nation rediscover both its Hellenic and Byzantine pasts. The oppressive Turkish occupation, rife with intrigue, corruption, favoritism, greed, opaque bureaucratic legerdemain, and arbitrary enforcement of draconian laws, weighed heavily on Greek life. It took an assortment of Greek expatriates, wealthy westernized aristocrats and merchants, later joined by klephtes, guerrilla brigand leaders operating in rural mountainous regions, to ignite the Greek liberation movement. The insurgents knew that even though the Ottoman Empire was crumbling from within, their success ultimately depended on support from major European powers. In what would become a pattern over much of the next 2 centuries, they sought foreign patronage. The governments of Britain, France, and Russia were slow to act. However, European and later American writers, poets, intellectuals, academics, and travelers, fueled by a romantic idealization of ancient Greece, ignited public opinion that engaged politicians and diplomats. They celebrated ancient Greece as the progenitor of Western civilization. Periclean Athens was mythologized as the apotheosis of democracy in its purest form, the pinnacle of Western humanism and artistic achievement. When Greeks launched their sporadic war of independence from the Ottoman Empire on March 25, 1821, the revolutionaries were riven by factional dissent. Politicians clashed with military leaders, and civil strife became civil war. The Sultan, using support from Egypt, besieged and then captured Athens and the Acropolis. In disarray, the Greeks cleverly enticed the self-interested involvement of the English, French, and Russians. The three powers proposed an armistice, warning the warring sides that if both did not accept the treaty offered, they would intervene. The Greeks accepted, the Turks did not. In the ensuing Battle of Navarino, the Allied squadrons destroyed the Ottoman fleet, effectively ending the war. But the path to independence was perilous. The country split into regional blocs and moved closer to anarchy. In 1832, the great powers decided that Greece was too unstable to govern itself and would be better off as a monarchy. They shopped the royal houses of Europe and created a Kingdom of Greece with Bavarian Prince Otto Friedrich Ludwig imposed as its first ruler. 17-year-old Otto, a Roman Catholic who never converted to Greek Orthodoxy, came with a regent, a retinue of Bavarian advisors, and more than 3,000 Bavarian troops. He later married a teenaged German Lutheran duchess, whose troublesome interference in affairs of state was a harbinger of 20th-century royal practices. A minority of modernizers struggled against a majority of traditionalists to build a European-style government. After an 1843 military coup, the king was compelled to allow a constitution modeled after that of France, but it was effectively a royal dictatorship. A form of democracy was established, but democratic rule was often twisted by violence, fraud, and clientelism. Childless, Otto was overthrown, and the royal line of succession was changed to become part of the historic German ducal House of Glücksburg, which includes the royal houses of Denmark, Norway, and Windsor. During Panayotis's absence from Greece, his homeland witnessed the collapse of the megali idea, a type of manifest destiny that sought to incorporate large parts of the Byzantine Empire, including millions of Greece-identifying co-religionists or Greek speakers living in Ottoman lands. By 1913, Greece had nearly doubled its territory and population. The leading advocate for enosis, or union, was a charismatic young Cretan politician, Eleftherios Venizelos, who sought to transform his country at home and abroad. Dubbed the Greek Bismarck, he became, during the first decades of the 20th century, the leading Republican reformer, statesman, prime minister, and a national hero. However, in so doing, he clashed with King Konstantinos, whose ambitions were more modest. Their political battles led to a national schism that would haunt the country for decades. Educated in Germany and married to Kaiser Wilhelm II's sister, Konstantinos continued the crown's linkage to Germany. Believing Germany would easily win the Great War, the Germanophile royal palace decided to remain neutral and share in the victory of the Central Powers. In stark contrast, Prime Minister Venizelos greatly admired Britain and France. Convinced that the British Navy would eventually be victorious, Venizelos enthusiastically advocated that Greece ally itself with the Triple Entente powers, a decision for which the country would be well rewarded. The king's provocative and unconstitutional interference in foreign policy making led to Venizelos's elected governments resigning, getting re-elected, and resigning again in October 1915. In the ensuing national schism, Konstantinos ruled from Athens, while Venizelos established a rival provisional government in Thessaloniki, known colloquially as Salonika. The Allies recognized the Venizelos government. On the morning of December 1, 1916, 12 years to the day before Elias was born, after the Anglo-French fleet had surrounded the Greek capital and the king failed to negotiate a diplomatic solution, French warships bombarded the palace and other targets, killing and wounding civilians and Greek soldiers. Konstantinos abdicated and Venizelos formed a new national government, but he was defeated in the next plebiscite and went into exile. Konstantinos returned. In dividing the spoils of World War I, the Allies, in the Treaty of Sèvres, gave Greece administrative control of the heavily Greek-populated Asia Minor coastal region of Smyrna, now Izmir, which had a Greek population more than half that of Athens, and western and eastern Thrace, not far from Constantinople. Turkey, however, refused to ratify the treaty. Ignoring diplomatic efforts of the great powers to find a peaceful solution to the impasse, Konstantinos and the new Greek government launched an ill-prepared invasion of Turkey, stretching out indefensible supply lines and failing in its assault on Ankara. Turkey struck back, intent on expunging 3,000 years of Greek history from its soil. In August 1922, in what Greeks refer to as the Great Catastrophe, at least several 100,000 Greeks, some of whom traced their ancestry to the time of Homer, were killed, the result of gruesome tortures, rapes, and massacres that culminated in a monumental blaze at least partially set by Turkish forces, the Great Fire of Smyrna. It is estimated that more than 250,000 Greeks died in the overall conflict. Violent ethnic cleansing, which had occurred to varying degrees in both countries for more than a decade, gave way to the diplomatically controlled ethnic cleansing stipulated in the Treaty of Lausanne, the forced exchange of religious minorities. Some 500,000 Muslim Turks were expelled from Greece, and more than 1,300,000 Christian Greeks from Asia Minor were turned into refugees, most crowding into Greater Athens, Macedonia, and Western Thrace. They shared the same religion, but many were poor, culturally distinct, and did not speak Greek. difficulties in assimilating them economically and socially would affect the political landscape for generations. The late 1920s Greece, in which Panayotis and Panayota were married, was quite different from the one they'd grown up in. A vibrant shipping and trade center, Athens had seen its population nearly double. According to the 1928 national census, only a third of the nearly 500,000 Athenians had been born there, a third had moved from other parts of Greece, and a third were refugees from Asia Minor. An expanding network of beige electronic streetcars had replaced the horse-drawn trams of Panayotis's youth. Apartment blocks supplanted low-rise homes with gardens. Touches of modern architecture from Bauhaus to Art Deco dotted the 19th-century neoclassical skyline. The air was perfumed with fragrances of currants, cotton, olive oil, and tobacco, export crops that would soon crash in world markets. But Greece's extended political upheaval had taken a toll. Mourning for the dead and the dashed irredentist dream gave way to a military takeover of the government and the scapegoating of competing partisans. Officers of the anti-monarchist military league purged officers loyal to the king, much the way Konstantinos had removed those loyal to Venizelos. Tribunals led to executions, and abdications led to a republic that could not stand. Multiple short-lived governments and several attempted military coups followed, capped by a successful military coup d'etat whose leader was overthrown a year later. A republican constitution was passed in 1927, but the populists, then the primary opponents of the Republicans, refused to support it. Even the electoral system itself was a matter for dispute. High-minded rhetorical fights about whether Greece should be a republic or a monarchy continued, but the real stakes were patronage jobs and personal power. Venizelos returned to power in 1928, committed to fostering a bourgeois democracy and improving international relations. He embarked on ambitious programs to reform education, build the nation's transportation infrastructure, and transform its traditional agriculture system. But in 1929, Elias Demetracopoulos' first year of life, the Wall Street crash and global Great Depression hit Greece hard. Emigrants' remittances, exports, and agricultural prices fell precipitously. New foreign loans were unavailable, and Greece suspended interest and payments on past obligations. Venizelos' ambitious modernization strategy unraveled. Venizelos lost control of parliament. Unsuccessful coups and failed assassination attempts followed. In March 1935, Venizelos fled the country, opening the floodgates of retribution, purges, and executions of Venizelos loyalists. A rigged plebiscite paved the way for the restoration of the monarchy, with Konstantinos' son, King George II, at its head. In the January 1936 election, Royalist parties won 143 seats and Republicans 141. The Communists, with only a few thousand members, received about 50,000 votes, or 6% of the total. With only 15 seats in Parliament, they held the balance of power. Despite public protestations to the contrary, both Royalists and Republicans shamelessly tried to cut secret deals with the Communists. General Alexander Papagos, the Minister of War in 1936, told King George II that any government that included Communists was unacceptable to the military. The king reacted first by replacing Papagos with staunch Royalist General Ioannis Metaxas. Then, after unsuccessful efforts to form a ruling coalition, he appointed Metaxas to run the government. The Parliament ratified the decision and adjourned. It did not meet again for a decade. The Metaxas dictatorship had begun. The years since the national schism had exposed profound differences between cosmopolitan and parochial, urban and rural, republican and monarchist impulses in Greek society. Venezuelists and new immigrants were generally supportive of reforms, expanding educational opportunities, democratizing the language, and paving the way for capitalist modernization. In contrast, royalists and those whose
Sample complete. Ready to continue?